Racist millionaire judge fined black man, then discovered he was a federal prosecutor. The stomping sound of Gabriel Renson's shoes echoed through the marble hallways of the municipal courthouse in Grenville, South Carolina. He took a deep breath, trying to contain his frustration at being late. The traffic that morning had been a nightmare, but not as much as the urgent human trafficking case he had to resolve before rushing there. He clenched his fist as he glanced at his watch. 10 minutes late. Shouldn't be a problem, right? But he knew this courthouse wasn't known for its flexibility. As he walked up the stone steps to the building's entrance, his thoughts were on one place, his grandmother's house. It was much more than just a piece of real estate. It was the home that held the memories of his childhood, where he would run around the garden while his grandmother sang his favorite songs. Now, because of a clerical error, they were charging him outrageous taxes, jeopardizing something that had immeasurable value to him. With firm steps, Gabriel walked into the courthouse. He straightened his suit jacket, ran a hand over his tie, and headed toward the courtroom. His name should have been called by now, but he hoped there would be a chance to explain his delay. After all, he wasn't just any ordinary man complaining about a random fine. He was a federal inspector, and he was certain he could prove the charge was unfair. The problem? He had no idea who he was about to face. As he walked through the halls of the courthouse, Gabriel felt a weight on his chest. His grandmother's house wasn't just a piece of property. It was the heart of his family, a place filled with memories he couldn't let slip away because of a tax mistake. He remembered the summers spent there, the smell of homemade bread fresh from the oven, the stories his grandmother would tell him as he rested his head on her lap. He straightened the cuffs of his white shirt and ran a hand over his dark suit. It was impeccable, as always. His job demanded it. Even after an exhausting night dealing with a human trafficking case, something that consumed him emotionally, he would not let his tiredness show. Life had taught him that appearance and posture matter, especially in environments like that court. But what really mattered at that moment was proving that the charge on the house was wrong. He had gathered all the documents, analyzed every detail, and knew he was right. What he did not know, however, was that justice does not always follow logic or facts. Sometimes it simply follows the power of those in charge. Even before entering the courtroom, Gabriel was approached by one of the court officials, a short man with a worried expression. "Are you Gabriel Renson?" he asked, casting an anxious glance toward the door of the judge's chambers. Gabriel nodded. "Then be careful. Judge Whitman doesn't tolerate tardiness. He's thrown people out for much less." Gabriel took a deep breath. He had dealt with tough authorities before. What mattered were the facts, and he had solid evidence. This wasn't a simple request or a desperate attempt. This was a well-documented case. "Thanks for the warning," he replied, adjusting his posture, before pushing open the solid wood door and entering the courtroom. As he took his first steps into the room, Gabriel felt an immediate discomfort. The inequality in the environment was glaring. In the first rows, well-dressed lawyers chatted casually, with wealthy clients who smiled as if they were there on a whim. In the last rows, simpler people, many of them black, waited anxiously, some nervously wringing their hands, others looking at the floor as if they already knew justice was not on their side. Gabriel had seen this scenario before. A court where the scales of justice tipped in favor of those with the most money and influence. Even so, he remained confident. His documents were organized, his evidence was clear. He was not there asking for favors, he was demanding justice. But he still did not know that, for Judge Charles Whitman, justice was a concept that could be bought and manipulated. Sitting in the bench reserved for those awaiting trial, Gabriel watched attentively the unfolding of the hearings before his own. He noticed something strange. Other defendants had also arrived late, but the judge did not show any irritation. A well-dressed blonde woman had entered almost 15 minutes after the session began. Judge Charles Whitman did not even mention the delay, A middle-aged man, apparently a businessman, arrived even later, smiling, and was greeted with a simple, "Try to be more punctual next time." Gabriel took a deep breath. Something seemed wrong. Then his name was called. He stood up, maintaining his posture firm, and walked to the front of the room. Before he could even open his mouth, the judge's cold, authoritative voice echoed through the courtroom. "Mr. Renson, I see that you are late. In my court, tardiness has consequences." Gabriel frowned, trying to contain his indignation. "Your Honor, if you will allow me, I can explain." "No explanation necessary," Whitman interrupted, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses as he studied the papers in front of him. "A fine of $750. Pay by the end of the day or face additional action." A buzz filled the room. Gabriel saw a few people exchanging uncomfortable glances. Why was he the only one being punished? He wanted to question it right then and there, but he knew he had to be strategic. He clenched his fists discreetly. The amount of the fine was not the issue. The problem was the clear injustice, but he would not back down. Not now. Gabriel took a deep breath, keeping his cool. He knew he had to choose his words carefully. "Your Honor, I would just like to ask for a moment to explain why I'm late." His voice was firm but respectful. Judge Whitman sighed heavily, as if he were already bored. "Be brief." Gabriel lifted his chin. "I'm a federal prosecutor, and this morning I was involved in a human trafficking case. Time was of the essence to ensure the safety of a victim. I did my best to get here on time, but the situation required my immediate attention." He had expected the judge to at least show some semblance of understanding, but Whitman merely raised his eyebrows and let out a dry laugh. "Mr. Renson, this court does not operate on your personal agenda. Everyone who enters here has responsibilities. Yours is not more important than anyone else's." Gabriel's jaw clenched. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I have seen other defendants arrive late and receive no punishment. I would like to understand why, in my case, there is such a severe penalty." The room fell silent. A few spectators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Judge Whitman frowned and leaned forward. "Are you implying that this court is not impartial, Mr. Renson?" Gabriel held the judge's gaze. "I am simply asking for consistency in the application of the law." Whitman slammed his gavel down. "The fine is upheld. Next item." His dry, unforgiving tone left no room for argument, but Gabriel knew what was happening. The judge's disdain was not just for his supposed tardiness. It was something deeper, and it wouldn't end there. The weight of the situation fell on Gabriel like a sharp blow to the chest. He had already noticed the inequality in the courtroom, but now it was impossible to ignore. Other white defendants had arrived late and were dismissed without punishment. He, a black man, had been fined without even having his case heard impartially. He looked around. Some people avoided his gaze, while others seemed uncomfortable, as if they realized what was happening, but were afraid to react. Gabriel clenched his fists. He had dealt with injustice before, but never so blatantly, so explicitly. Wasting no time, he discreetly took out his cell phone and opened the Notes app. He began to record everything. Other white defendants arrived late. None received a fine. Judge Whitman ignored my justification and laughed at my delay. A biased and partial trial. He glanced at the clock in the courtroom, noting the exact time. If anything was to be done, he would need proof. With years of experience as a federal prosecutor, Gabriel knew that injustice without evidence was just a story. But documented injustice, that was a case. And now, he had one. Gabriel took a deep breath and tried to focus on the original reason he had come to court, to correct an error in the property tax bill on his grandmother's house. He opened his briefcase and organized the documents before speaking. Your Honor, the reason for my hearing today is an error in the property tax bill on the house that had belonged to my grandmother for over 50 years. I have all the evidence here that proves the amount charged is incorrect. Judge Whitman, however, did not even look at the papers. He drummed his fingers on the table, showing complete disinterest. "Mr. Renson," he began, adjusting his glasses, "we are still talking about your tardiness. I would have expected someone in your profession to understand the importance of punctuality in a courtroom." Gabriel stood firm. "Your Honor, I have already explained the reason for my delay. With all due respect, I ask that we focus on the case that brought me here." The judge leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Funny. A federal prosecutor should be a role model, not someone who shows up late to court and then tries to distract us." Gabriel's patience was wearing thin. It was clear that Whitman did not want to deal with his case fairly. "I am not distracting you," Gabriel replied, keeping his voice calm but firm. "I am here as a citizen to challenge a tax error that affects my family. I am entitled to a fair hearing, regardless of any other factor." The judge laughed, a dry, sarcastic sound. "Right, what an interesting word." The room was silent for a few seconds. The contempt in Whitman's voice was clear. Gabriel felt the eyes of some people in the audience. They also realized what was happening, but he would not let himself be shaken. If the judge wanted to divert attention to humiliate him, Gabriel would make sure that this attempt did not go unnoticed. Gabriel straightened his posture, holding the documents tightly in his hands. He looked directly at the judge, and without changing his tone of voice, asked the question that would make the entire court hold its breath. "Your Honor, do the rules of this court apply equally to everyone?" Judge Whitman blinked a few times, as if the question had surprised him. His expression became rigid. The room fell completely silent. "What are you trying to imply, Mr. Renson?" The judge replied, leaning forward. "I'm not implying anything, I'm asking. Because, as far as I can tell, other defendants who arrived late today didn't get a ticket, but when it was my turn, I was immediately punished. I'd like to know why." A murmur began to spread among the people present. Gabriel noticed glances exchanged, heads shaking. Some people who had been dismissed minutes before seemed uncomfortable. The judge adjusted his glasses and tried to maintain his composure. "Punctuality is a fundamental principle in this court. You should know that." "I agree," Gabriel nodded without hesitation. "But why wasn't this principle applied to everyone in the same way?" The judge choked, visibly uncomfortable. "Circumstances vary from case to case, Mr. Renson. Are you implying that there was some kind of unequal treatment?" The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the answer. Gabriel didn't look away. "It's not me who's implying it, Your Honor. It's the facts that show it." The murmurs grew louder. Some people began to nod in low voices. The judge's discomfort was evident. He had not expected to be questioned like this in public. The tension in the room was now palpable. Everyone knew something was wrong, but few had the courage to say it out loud. Gabriel had just exposed the truth in a way that no one could ignore. Gabriel walked out of the courtroom, with his heart racing. What had happened inside could not be ignored. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of injustice pulsing through his veins. As a private citizen, he had been humiliated. But as a federal prosecutor, he had the power to do something about it. Still standing on the courthouse steps, he pulled out his cell phone and began reviewing the notes and videos he had discreetly taken during the hearing. Every moment of Judge Whitman's disdain was recorded. Every glaring difference in the treatment of black and white defendants was there, evident. He looked up at the gray sky above Grenville and made his decision. He would not let this go unpunished. The next morning, Gabriel dressed in his most impeccable dark blue suit and pinned his badge to the inside pocket of his jacket. This time, He would not be returning to court as a regular citizen. Now he would be entering as a federal prosecutor. As he walked back through the doors of the municipal courthouse, Gabriel noticed surprised looks from the clerks. Some whispered to each other, recognizing him. He ignored the murmurs and walked steadily to the reception desk. The secretary, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked up. "Mr. Renson, I thought your case had already been resolved yesterday." "I'm not here for my personal case today," he said, slowly pulling out his ID and placing it on the counter. "I'm here in an official capacity." The woman's eyes widened as she read the words "Federal Prosecutor" on the document. Her face went pale. "Oh, just a moment, Mr. Renson." She swallowed hard and picked up the phone, calling someone upstairs. As Gabriel waited, he felt the silence take over the room. The courthouse that had seemed like a stage for common injustice the day before now seemed like a restless anthill. Minutes later, a court officer hurriedly appeared. He looked at Gabriel and, without hiding his nervousness, gestured for him to follow him. "This way, sir." Gabriel straightened his tie, stood up straight, and entered the hallway that led to the administrative offices. He was no longer just a citizen contesting a ticket. He was the law, and he was here to demand justice. Gabriel was led into the courtroom. The room was austere, with walls lined with shelves of legal books and a large polished wooden table in the center. On the other side of the room, sitting in a dark leather chair, was Judge Charles Whitman. The magistrate, accustomed to having absolute control within his courtroom, looked uncomfortable. His hands were folded on the table, and his expression, which had been arrogant the day before, now showed a hint of concern. Gabriel wasted no time. He removed his identification and placed it firmly on the table. "Judge Whitman, I believe we met under different circumstances yesterday," Gabriel said, his voice calm but firm. "Today, however, I am here as a federal prosecutor." Whitman raised an eyebrow, forcing a tight smile. "Federal prosecutor? Interesting. And what is the reason for this visit, Mr. Renson?" Gabriel slid a small notebook out of his jacket pocket and opened it to a specific page. "I am conducting an investigation into the disparate treatment of this court, especially with regard to the penalties imposed on black and white defendants. Yesterday, I noticed a clear discrepancy in the way I was treated compared to other citizens who arrived late." Whitman straightened his tie and leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Renson, this court follows the law. If there was any sense of inequality, it may have been just a coincidence." Gabriel smiled tightly. "Coincidence?" He took his cell phone out of his pocket and placed it on the table. "I have videos and detailed notes from yesterday's hearing. I recorded every single person who arrived late. Oddly enough, I was the only one penalized. And not only that." He closed the notebook and looked directly at the judge. "I have also reviewed the records of your past decisions. The numbers don't lie, Judge Whitman." The judge's expression hardened. He tried to maintain a dignified posture, but Gabriel noticed the slight tremor in his hands. "Mr. Renson, I believe this conversation is taking an unnecessary turn. Are you implying that there is any bias in this court?" Gabriel leaned forward slightly, keeping his tone firm. "I am not implying. I am stating, and starting today, all of your conduct will be documented and investigated by the appropriate authorities." Silence filled the room. Judge Whitman pressed his lips together, looking away for a moment. The game had changed. This time, he was not dealing with a private citizen, but with a man who had the power to expose the truth. Gabriel crossed his arms and looked directly into Judge Whitman's eyes. The silence in the room was almost deafening. The heavy air of tension seemed to press against the walls. "There is no doubt, Justice Whitman. There is a clear pattern of racial bias in your decisions," Gabriel said, opening a file he had brought with him. I have reviewed over 100 cases from your court in the last 2 years. Black defendants, on average, received fines 30% higher than white defendants for the same offenses. And not only that, while whites received warnings or had their fines reduced, blacks almost never received any relief. The judge's face turned red. He straightened his tie and cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "This is absurd," Whitman protested, slamming his hand on the table. "I follow the law. I don't discriminate against anyone." Gabriel slid the documents across the table. "Then explain these numbers," he challenged, pointing to the statistics. "Explain why white defendants who were late were not fined, but I was. Explain why, instead of focusing on my tax case, you decided to humiliate me in front of the entire courtroom." Whitman opened and closed his mouth, as if searching for an answer. But nothing came. His gaze swept the room, where one of the court clerks and a bailiff were present. They said nothing, but their look spoke volumes. "Perhaps you thought no one noticed, that no one cared. But now, Judge Whitman, everyone sees," Gabriel continued, his voice firm, "and most importantly, the authorities are now paying attention." The judge tried to compose himself, running his hands over his face. "These numbers can be misinterpreted. There are many factors to consider." "Not when the pattern repeats itself so often," Gabriel interrupted. "What you are doing is not only unfair, it is illegal, and I guarantee that it will not go unpunished." The courtroom remained completely silent. Judge Whitman finally realized that there was no easy way out. For the first time in years, he was not in control. In the following days, Gabriel's revelation took on unimaginable proportions. The case began to circulate in the local press, but quickly reached national headlines. Renowned newspapers, television channels, and news portals began covering the scandal in the Grenville courthouse. South Carolina judge accused of racial bias by federal prosecutor. Racial disparity in the judicial system. Gabriel Renson's complaint exposes a systemic problem. The public outcry was immediate. Civil rights organizations have mobilized, demanding a full investigation into Judge Whitman's conduct. The state's Judicial Review Commission, pressured by the backlash, has announced an emergency audit of the court's decisions. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse itself, the staff began to stir. Many who had previously feared reprisals saw Gabriel's courage as an opportunity to finally expose the truth. The judge's clerk, a woman in her 50s named Margaret Dawson, was among the first to speak out. She gave formal testimony to the committee, revealing internal conversations and documents that confirmed a pattern of discrimination in Whitman's decisions. "I had worked directly with him for years," Margaret confessed in an anonymous interview with a television station, "and I saw time and time again how he treated certain defendants with contempt, while others were treated softly. We knew something was wrong, but no one had the courage to stand up to him." Another decisive testimony came from the court clerk, Thomas Reynolds, who also decided to break his silence. "I would hand over the files on each case before the hearings," Thomas said. Judge Whitman would walk into the courtroom with his mind made up when he saw the defendant's name and photo. "I knew it wasn't right, but who were we to question a judge?" The court's internal records, reviewed by the commission, confirmed what Gabriel had long suspected. There was a systemic pattern of harsher penalties for black defendants. The case had become too big to ignore. Now the question was no longer whether Judge Whitman would face consequences, but when he would finally fall. The pressure on Judge Whitman reached an unbearable level. With the investigation moving quickly and the media covering every new development, his reputation was in tatters. Protests began to break out in front of the Grenville Municipal Courthouse. Outraged citizens carried signs with slogans like "Justice for all" and "Judge Whitman, your time is up." Inside the courthouse, the hallways were quieter than ever. The tense air made even the most senior clerks avoid eye contact with Whitman. His face, once proud and imposing, now showed weariness and concern. Late in the afternoon of a rainy Monday, the news that everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. Whitman himself called a press conference. With a pale face and downcast eyes, he stood before the journalists. His tone of voice no longer had its usual arrogance. "After reflection, and in light of the circumstances, I have decided to resign my position as a judge of this court, effective immediately," he announced. The words had barely left his mouth when the buzz began. Reporters tried to capture every reaction from those present, while outside people cheered. But Whitman's resignation was only the beginning. The impact of Gabriel Renson's case was so great that the state of South Carolina had no choice but to act. State officials announced a series of reforms to combat racial bias in the justice system. Among the new measures were mandatory training for all judges and court staff on unconscious bias, and the creation of an independent commission to oversee judicial decisions and ensure that punishments were meted out fairly and equitably. In addition, a new auditing program was implemented, analyzing the decision-making patterns of all judges in the state to prevent cases like Whitman's from happening again. For Gabriel, this moment symbolized more than the downfall of a corrupt judge. It was real change. A system that had long failed to protect the most vulnerable was now being forced to evolve. Gabriel Renson's story did not end with Justice Whitman's resignation. On the contrary, that moment was just the beginning of something much bigger. The case quickly gained national attention, being featured on major television networks, newspapers, and digital platforms. In interviews, Gabriel spoke with determination and passion. "I fought not only for myself, but for everyone who has ever been wronged by a system that was supposed to protect them," he would say. The impact was immediate. Civil rights organizations used his story as an example in campaigns for equal justice. Judicial reform movements gained momentum in other states, pushing for greater transparency and equity in the courts. Judges began to be scrutinized more rigorously, and cases of discrimination began to be scrutinized more closely. In Grenville, Gabriel came to be seen as a symbol of resistance. He was approached on the street by people thanking him for his courage. "You gave a voice to those who have never been heard," said an elderly woman when she met him at the grocery store. Invitations to lectures and events came from all sides. Gabriel began to travel the country, sharing his story and encouraging others not to remain silent in the face of injustice. His presence inspired judges, lawyers, and ordinary citizens to demand change. But more than any public recognition, Gabriel felt that his greatest victory was personal. His grandmother's house, the home he fought to protect, remained safe. Every time he entered that place full of memories, he remembered that it was all worth it. The lesson was clear. A single voice can indeed challenge an unjust system. And sometimes all it takes to change the world is someone who refuses to accept what is wrong. If this story moved you and made you think, don't forget to like it so that more people can see it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more inspiring stories like this one, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share this video. Together, we can spread this story and make a difference.